Thank you for watching this teaching in the book of 2 Thessalonians. Today we're in 2 Thessalonians, the first chapter, verse number 3. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and get your Bibles out and read along with me. You know what? I believe that if you will read and hear, and let me just encourage you even to take some notes. Because you know what? One thing that we've discovered, if you hear something, it's good. If you read something and hear something, it's even better. But you know what? If you really want to retain what's being said, write some notes. Now, let me just say this. I write notes in my Bible. In the Bible that I use for my devotions, you know what? I pencil in, I color it, I write all kinds of notes in there. You know what? Why? Because it helps me to remember what I read. So, listen, read it, write it. Those three things, it'll help you to retain what you're receiving. Now, we're in 2 Thessalonians, the first chapter, verse number 3, and this is what it says. We ought always to give thanks to God for you, brethren, as it is only fitting, because your faith is greatly enlarged, and the love of each one of you towards one another grows even greater. You know, there's two things that characterize the church at Thessalonica. Two wonderful things. It wasn't how they moved in the power of the Spirit, even though that's a wonderful thing. It wasn't how theologically secure they were, even though that's a good thing to have. The two things that characterize this dynamic church, and I believe it's the two things that cause this church to reach out and to touch the world that they're living in. Those two things are, number one, they're a church of extremely large faith. What does the Apostle Paul say? He says, because your faith is greatly enlarged. The second thing that made this church so dynamic was their love. You know what? When you get faith and love working together, you know what happens? Lives are changed. People are reached. When people are saying, I'm believing God and my faith is moving me forward, you know what? It's not just for themselves. It's that faith that moves you forward to reaching other people, to changing other people's lives. Let me say something to you. And I want you to really listen to this. If your faith is only for yourself, then your faith is not doing near what it should be doing. But if you're using your faith, and you're using it not only for yourself, but you're using your faith to reach your community. You're using your faith to believe God for revival in your church, to believe God for changes in people's lives right there in your neighborhood. You know what? Then you're using your faith for the right purpose. Now notice what the Apostle Paul says here. He says, your faith is greatly enlarged. Now in 1 Thessalonians, the Apostle Paul talked about their great faith. Now here 6 months later, or thereabouts, the Apostle Paul is saying, your faith is greatly enlarged. Now, greatly enlarged means to be larger than normal. In other words, these guys are not normal Christians. I believe it was Watchman Nee that wrote the excellent book, The Normal Christian Life. You know what? The normal Christian life is nothing close to what we as believers are experiencing today. And here the Apostle Paul is saying to these Thessalonians, he's saying, you know what? You guys are way beyond normal. You're way beyond normal. That's what it means that when he says that your faith is greatly enlarged. Your faith is so big, it's way beyond what we would consider to be normal. Wow, what a compliment. Man, you are so moving in faith that you're way beyond what we would usually see. And again, I say to you, I believe that this is one of the reasons why the church in Thessalonica was so dynamic, is they were believing God. Now, let me say this. They are not in an easy situation. They're being persecuted. They're seeing fellow believers killed because of their faith. They're losing their jobs because of their faith. But yet the Apostle Paul says your faith is way beyond that which is considered to be normal. The faith of the Thessalonians was a faith that was larger than any other church. I believe that's what the Apostle Paul is saying. He's saying, you know what? Your faith is greater than the faith that I see in Ephesus. Your faith is greater than the faith I see at Philippi. Your faith is greater than the faith of Corinth. Your faith is greater than what we see in the region of Galatia. Your faith is beyond normal. But the Apostle Paul doesn't end there. He says this at the end of verse number 3. And he says, and the love of each one of you towards one another grows even greater. Love. Again, that combination is so powerful. Your love for one another. Now, what's he talking about? He's talking about a deep affection that the people in Thessalonica have for each other in the church. You know, one thing that I believe that if Christians would just begin to love each other, it would be an example to the rest of the world. But yet I hear people constantly putting down other believers. I hear it, I see it on YouTube, I see it on the internet, I see it on television, constantly saying bad things about other believers. And you know what? They might be wrong. Their doctrine may not be completely correct. But you know what? We need to love each other. We are part of the same family. You know, when we get to heaven, there's not going to be a room for the Pentecostals, a room for the Baptists, a room for the Calvinists. You know what? We're all going to be together in heaven. And one of the things that made the church at Thessalonica so dynamic was their love for each other. Now, my time is up for today. We're going to pick up our study in 2 Thessalonians tomorrow. Will you join us? Thank you for watching.